When you step onto a hiking trail, you accept a silent agreement with the wilderness. You assume the inherent risks of the natural world. The loose gravel on a steep cliffside, the sudden dropping of temperatures as the sun dips behind a ridge, or the easy confusion of a forest trail that looks identical in every direction. We understand these physical dangers. But what if the most unsettling hazard of the wilderness wasn't a physical location, but a calendar date? Deep within the archives of the National Park Service lies an odd statistical phenomenon. Across entirely different landscapes, separated by thousands of miles, rugged terrain, and decades of time, a specific day of the month keeps repeating like a glitch in a computer program: the 17th. To understand why this number captures the imagination of researchers and true crime investigators alike, we have to travel back to the summer of 1981, deep into the granite wilderness of Yosemite National Park. On July 17, 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Arras was enjoying a classic backcountry adventure. She was part of a 10-person group on a multi-day mule riding trip, staying at the remote Sunrise High Sierra camp. This is a place accessible only by foot or on horseback, nestled high up at an elevation of over 9,000 feet. It is a stunning, isolated alpine environment. Late in the afternoon, after the group had unpacked, Stacey decided she wanted to walk a short distance down the trail to take photos of a nearby lake. She asked her father to join her, but he was tired from the long ride. An elderly member of their tour group offered to walk part of the way with her. They set off together. After a short distance, the elderly gentleman sat down on a rock to rest, watching Stacey continue down the trail toward a small hill and a grove of trees. She stepped past the trees, out of his line of sight, to get a better angle for a photograph. He waited. Minutes passed. The silence of the high country settled in. When she didn't return, he called out her name. No answer. Within hours, an intensive search was underway. In the days that followed, search and rescue teams, tracking dogs, and helicopters combed every square inch of the granite slabs, the thick brush, and the deep waters of the lake. They found absolutely nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no scent. The only physical piece of evidence ever recovered was a small plastic camera lens cap, found resting on a boulder near where she was last seen. Stacey Arras had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind an empty trail on the afternoon of July 17th. Decades passed. The file remained cold. Then, exactly 30 years later, the calendar aligned once more. On June 17, 2011, 30-year-old George Penka arrived at Yosemite with a group of about 20 people from his church. They were hiking the famous, grueling Upper Yosemite Falls Trail, a steep, sun-baked path that climbs thousands of feet above the valley floor. At the top of the falls, amidst the sweeping views of the Sierra Nevada, the group began to disperse slightly to explore and rest. Penka stepped away from the main pack to find a viewpoint. It was a brief detour. He was surrounded by dozens of fellow hikers, on a trail bustling with summer tourists. But when the group gathered to make the descent back to the valley, Penka was nowhere to be found. His companions assumed he had simply hiked ahead. But when they reached the trailhead, and his car was still parked, empty, panic set in. For days, Yosemite Search and Rescue deployed elite ground trackers, search dogs, and thermal imaging helicopters. They scaled the steep cliffs and searched the churning waters of the Yosemite Creek drainage. Just like Stacey Arras 30 years prior, George Penka had vanished without leaving a single trace behind. Two different people, separated by a generation, disappearing under virtually identical, baffling circumstances, both on the 17th. 5 years later, the date returned to the park's missing person logs. On September 17, 2016, 74-year-old Peter Jackson, an experienced and healthy outdoorsman, texted his son to let him know he was embarking on a hike in Yosemite. He was staying at the White Wolf Campground, a peaceful area in the northern part of the park. When Jackson failed to return home, rangers went to his campsite. They found his tent pitched, his gear neatly organized, and his vehicle parked in its designated spot. He had simply walked into the forest and never walked out. For 3 years, his disappearance was a complete mystery. Then, in 2019, a state park ranger off-duty stumbled across Jackson's backpack in an incredibly rugged off-trail zone miles away from his camp. Yet, despite finding his heavy gear, no physical remains of Peter Jackson were ever located. Another life lost to the wilderness, anchored to the 17th of September. If this phenomenon were confined to the borders of Yosemite, we could write it off as a tragic, localized coincidence. But as we expand our gaze across the American West, the pattern moves with us. We travel south to the immense, sun-baked abyss of Grand Canyon National Park. On June 17, 2016, the very same year Peter Jackson vanished in Yosemite, 52-year-old Floyd Roberts III was enjoying a multi-day backpacking trip with his friends. Roberts was a highly experienced hiker and a former NASA contractor. He knew how to read maps, how to navigate, and how to survive. The group was trekking across the remote, scorching Shivwits Plateau in the western portion of the Grand Canyon. During their hike, they encountered a small hill on the trail. His companions opted to climb directly up and over the ridge. Roberts, wanting to conserve his energy in the punishing heat, decided to hike around the flat base of the hill. The detour was minor. They expected to meet on the other side in less than 30 minutes. His friends waited on the far side of the hill. Minutes turned into an hour. Roberts never appeared. In the days that followed, rescue teams braved brutal 115-degree desert heat to find him. Helicopters swept the barren landscape. Ground crews searched the canyon crevices. Roberts was wearing a bright red shirt and carrying a large, highly visible blue backpack, items that should have stood out starkly against the red desert rock. Yet not a single thread of clothing, drop of water, or footprint was ever found. He had vanished behind a simple hill on the 17th of June. Even the Grand Canyon's most legendary historical mystery carries this date. In November of 1928, newlyweds Glenn and Bessie Hyde were attempting a daring, historic journey. They wanted to navigate the violent rapids of the Colorado River in a heavy, custom-built wooden scow. If they succeeded, Bessie would make history as the first documented woman to run the canyon's rapids. On November 17, 1928, the couple hiked up a steep trail to the south rim of the canyon to restock their food and supplies. They met with visitors, smiled, and were photographed standing next to their gear. It was the last time anyone ever saw them alive. Weeks later, searchers spotted their wooden boat drifting quietly near River Mile 237. When searchers boarded the vessel, they found a chilling scene. The boat was completely undamaged. The couple's food, cold weather clothing, supplies, and money were all untouched. Bessie's diary lay open, with her last entry dated December 9th. But of Glenn and Bessie Hyde, there was no sign. They had stepped off the grid. Their final documented photograph captured on the South Rim on the 17th of November. When we look at these cases side by side, the human brain naturally begs for a connection. We look at the dates, we see the pattern, and we want to believe there is a hidden force at work. Online, this has spawned wild, speculative theories. Stories of secret societies operating in the deep woods, ancient rituals tied to the phases of the moon, or even modern legends of feral communities living undetected in our national parks. But when we set aside the folklore and look at the hard science of search and rescue, a much more logical, yet equally terrifying, explanation emerges. First, consider the calendar itself. Mid-June and mid-July represent the absolute peak of the American summer vacation season. Millions of families, casual hikers, and tourists flock to national parks during these weeks. Many of these visitors are inexperienced in high-altitude or desert survival. Because of how our work weeks are structured, the middle of the month, specifically dates ranging from the 15th to the 17th, frequently land on or directly adjacent to busy summer weekends. More people on the trails statistically means a higher rate of accidents, medical emergencies, and navigation errors. Second, we must look at the environmental triggers of these specific dates. Mid-June and mid-July mark a volatile transition in the weather. In Yosemite, this is the exact time when high-altitude snowbanks finally melt, exposing rugged, slick granite slabs and swelling mountain creeks into raging, freezing torrents. In the Grand Canyon, Mid-June is historically when the region experiences its first massive, lethal heat waves of the summer, with temperatures on the canyon floor easily exceeding 115 degrees. When the human body faces extreme, rapid heat exhaustion, a dangerous cognitive shift occurs. Hikers become delirious. As heat stroke takes over, a natural survival instinct drives people to seek shade, to crawl into tight rock crevices, deep caves, or dense brush to escape the blistering sun. They hide from the heat, and in doing so, they inadvertently hide from the search teams and rescue helicopters looking for them from above. Finally, we must recognize the psychology of pattern seeking. Over the last century, thousands of people have gone missing in the vast wilderness of the United States. They have vanished on the 3rd, the 12th, the 25th, and the 30th. But when two high-profile cases align on the 17th, our minds instantly highlight the connection and ignore the rest. The 17th of the month is not a curse, and it is not a ritual. It is a sobering reminder of a simple truth. The wilderness does not care about our calendars. It does not watch the dates, and it does not keep time. It simply waits, silent and indifferent, for a hiker to take one wrong step. When logic fails to satisfy the human psyche, the mind turns to the fringe. For years, independent researchers, internet sleuths, and alternative theorists have looked at these exact same missing persons logs and concluded that the official explanations are simply a cover for something far more unsettling. If the 17th of the month isn't a statistical anomaly, then it must be a marker. A specific date chosen, utilized, or governed by a force we do not fully understand. When you dive into the deepest forums of the paranormal community, the theories move away from heat stroke and shifting currents and move toward the truly bizarre. The first major alternative theory centers around the concept of subterranean anomalies and the controversial legend of feral human populations. Across various video platforms and survival forums, a persistent myth has taken hold. The idea that deep within the thousands of unmapped caves, volcanic lava tubes, and abandoned mining shafts carving through Yosemite and the Grand Canyon, isolated, undocumented groups of people have managed to exist completely cut off from modern civilization. In the context of the 17th, fringe theorists suggest a horrifying motivation, a ritualistic timeline. The narrative implies that these alleged hidden factions operate on a strict, calendar-based cycle, emerging from the deep wilderness or subterranean caverns on specific nights to hunt, forage, or gather resources, leading to the sudden, trace-free disappearances of lone hikers who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Proponents of this theory point to the baffling lack of physical evidence left behind in cases like George Penka or Floyd Roberts. They ask, how can an adult human being, carrying bright, bulky backpacking gear, completely vanish within a 30-minute window without dropping a single water bottle, tearing a piece of clothing, or leaving a single footprint? To the fringe community, the answer isn't that they got lost. It's that they were actively removed from the surface by something that knows how to navigate the wilderness without leaving a trace. Of course, national park officials and survival experts completely dismiss this idea. To maintain a hidden society inside heavily trafficked parks like Yosemite, which sees over 4 million visitors a year, is logistically impossible. Modern search and rescue operations utilize advanced aerial LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map the ground through dense tree canopies, as well as highly sensitive thermal infrared imaging that can detect heat signatures from miles away. Any permanent hidden camps, smoke from fires, or underground openings with human activity would be flagged instantly by mapping teams, geological surveys, or backcountry rangers who monitor these lands year-round. The feral wilderness person is a staple of modern horror fiction, heavily drawing from cinematic tropes like The Hills Have Eyes, but it remains firmly in the realm of urban legend. Yet, as you push further into the bizarre, the theories shift from the subterranean to the terrestrial, focusing on one of North America's oldest cryptozoological mysteries, the legend of a large, undocumented hominid, commonly known as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. While mainstream science views the creature as a myth, alternative wilderness researchers have attempted to tie these creatures to the missing persons logs. In this branch of the mystery, theorists don't look at the calendar date as a human ritual, but as a biological trigger tied to the lunar cycle. As we noted earlier, the 17th of a lunar month marks the exact period where the full moon begins to wane, introducing a specific shift in nocturnal light. Cryptozoological theorists hypothesize that these apex predators alter their hunting patterns based on these precise shifts in nighttime visibility, utilizing the sudden onset of darker nights to move closer to tourist hot spots like the Sunrise High Sierra Camp without being seen. They argue that a massive, intelligent, camouflage-adapted apex predator could easily ambush a lone hiker like Stacey Arris, moving them silently away from the trail before anyone in the group even realizes they are gone. But biology and ecology completely debunk this hypothesis. An apex predator of that size would require an immense amount of daily caloric intake, leaving behind undeniable physical evidence of its existence: territorial markings, kill sites, scat, fur samples, and distinct footprints. In the history of Yosemite and the Grand Canyon, despite thousands of trail cameras, biological surveys, and millions of sharp-eyed tourists, no authentic physical evidence of such a creature has ever been recovered. When you strip away the monsters and the hidden tribes, you encounter the final, most modern fringe theory: the concept of localized magnetic anomalies and portal hypotheses. Some alternative physics enthusiasts argue that certain geographical formations, like the deep granite valleys of Yosemite or the unique iron-rich rock strata of the Grand Canyon, create intense electromagnetic fields. They speculate that under highly specific seasonal and astronomical alignments, these fields can cause localized spatial distortions or disruptions in navigational equipment, disorienting hikers so severely that they wander into areas completely inaccessible to search teams. Ultimately, these bizarre theories thrive because the reality of the wilderness is too painful to accept. It is terrifying to realize that a human being can simply make a minor, ordinary mistake, stepping off a trail to look at a view, walking around a small hill to save energy, and be completely destroyed by the indifferent forces of nature. Our brains invent monsters, hidden tribes, and ancient curses because a malicious entity is easier to comprehend than a vast, beautiful, and completely unforgiving wilderness that doesn't care if you live or die. To truly grasp how deep this rabbit hole goes, we have to step away from the sun-bleached cliffs of the West and enter the dense, silent canopy of the East. In the state of New York, the Adirondack Mountains stretch across millions of acres of rugged, heavily forested terrain. It was here, in the Lake George Wild Forest, that one of the most chilling modern wilderness disappearances took place, a case that search and rescue veterans still whisper about in hushed tones. The date was November 15, 2015. Thomas Messick Sr., an 82-year-old seasoned outdoorsman, went into the woods south of Brant Lake with a hunting party consisting of his son and 5 close friends. Because of his advanced age and a few health complications, Tom was not expected to hike deep into the thick brush. Instead, the group utilized a classic hunting strategy known as a deer drive. Tom's role was simple. He was a watcher or stander. He was positioned in a stationary, highly visible clearing near a wetland area. The rest of the party split up to walk through the forest, hopping to flush the deer out of the thickets and push them directly toward Tom's position. Tom was dressed in bright hunter's orange, carrying a loaded rifle, and had a fully functional walkie-talkie strapped to his chest. He was less than 100 yards away from the nearest member of his party. He was, by all accounts, completely safe. The hunters began their drive. As they walked through the woods, several members of the party noted that the forest had fallen into a heavy, eerie, almost unnatural silence. There were no birds calling, no squirrels rustling in the dry leaves, and no wind. But then, shortly before the drive concluded, one of the hunters reported hearing a strange, distinct, unidentifiable sound echoing through the quiet woods. It wasn't a gunshot, and it wasn't a human voice. It was a bizarre metallic clang or boom that seemed to vibrate through the air. When the drive ended, the hunters emerged from the trees and walked toward Tom's designated spot. But the clearing was empty. Tom Messick was gone. At first, they assumed he had simply walked back to the vehicles, but his radio went unanswered. Over the next few weeks, a massive search effort was launched. Hundreds of forest rangers, state police, canine tracking units, and search and rescue volunteers systematically gridded the area. They brought in specialized search dogs trained to locate the scent of human remains or clothing. They sent dive teams into the freezing waters of Lily Pond. They even flew helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras over the bare winter tree canopy. The result was absolute zero. Not a single footprint was found in the damp soil. No dropped bullet casings, no orange fabric, no rifle, and no walkie-talkie. The tracking units were completely baffled. The dogs could pick up Tom's scent in the exact spot where he had been sitting, but the scent didn't lead away from the clearing in any direction. It was as if his physical presence had simply been lifted directly off the face of the earth. The bizarre nature of the case reached a tipping point when the Federal Bureau of Investigation took the unusual step of getting involved in the search. According to reports, an agent eventually told Tom's wife, Beverly, something that would haunt her forever. Something isn't right with his case, but we don't know what. What makes the Messick case so terrifying is how it strips away the typical explanations. Tom wasn't lost, he was sitting still. He wasn't dynamic or wandering, he was waiting. He was heavily armed, and he was seconds away from help. Yet, whatever took him did so with such absolute silence and speed that he never had time to raise his rifle, scream for help, or even press the talk button on his walkie-talkie. And while Tom went missing on November 15th, researchers who look at the broader Adirondack region point out that this is part of a larger, regional cluster of bizarre autumn disappearances that keep circling right back to the middle of the month. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most heavily visited national park in the United States, famous for its rolling blue ridges, dense hemlock forests, and thick, low-hanging mountain fog. Yet, beneath its scenic beauty lies a complex terrain that has swallowed several hikers over the decades. Within the park's history, 3 unsolved disappearances stand out above all others. Known internally to park officials as the Big Three, these cases involve people who vanished in broad daylight, sometimes within feet of others, leaving behind questions that search and rescue teams still cannot answer. The disappearance of Polly Melton, 1981. On September 25, 1981, 58-year-old Thelma Polly Melton went for a walk that should have been entirely routine. Polly and her husband, Bob, spent their winters in Florida and their warmer months living in an Airstream trailer parked at the Deep Creek campground, right on the edge of the park. Polly was an incredibly experienced hiker who walked the local trails almost daily. She knew the layout of the park, the trail markers, and the campgrounds like the back of her hand. On that afternoon, Polly decided to go for a casual walk on the Deep Creek Trail, an exceptionally easy, wide, flat, and well-marked path. Before leaving her Airstream, she set a pot of spaghetti sauce to simmer on the stove, fully intending to be back in time for dinner. She set off with 2 of her close friends from the campground, Red and Trula. The 3 women walked together, laughing and chatting, enjoying the early autumn air. About an hour into the hike, Polly did something highly uncharacteristic. She suddenly increased her pace, pulling ahead of her friends. When Red and Trula called out to her, asking where she was going in such a hurry, Polly turned around, laughed, and kept walking. She crested a small, gentle bend in the trail, stepping briefly out of their line of sight. She was no more than a few dozen yards ahead of them. When Red and Trula rounded that same bend just a minute or 2 later, the trail ahead of them was completely empty. Polly was gone. Initially, her friends figured she had run ahead to play a joke or had quickly stepped off the trail to use the restroom. But as they walked further, calling her name, there was no response. When they reached the end of the trail at the campground, Polly wasn't there. The spaghetti sauce was still quietly simmering on her stove, but Polly had vanished. What followed was a massive search and rescue operation. Searchers gridded the Deep Creek area, bringing in tracking dogs and helicopters. The geography of this specific trail is crucial. On one side of the flat path is a steep hill, and on the other is a fast-flowing, wide creek. If Polly had suffered a sudden stroke or heart attack, she would have collapsed directly on the trail or just off the shoulder, where her friends would have immediately seen her. If she had fallen into the creek, Her body or personal items would have been spotted in the shallow, clear water. The tracking dogs were brought to the exact spot where Polly was last seen. They picked up her scent, but instead of leading down the trail or into the woods, the dogs paced in small circles at the edge of the path and stopped. It was as if her trail simply ceased to exist. Investigators later discovered that Polly had made several mysterious phone calls from a local food pantry, where she volunteered the day before she vanished. Furthermore, a bottle of Valium was missing from her trailer. While some speculate she planned a quiet escape to start a new life, others point to the terrifying speed of her disappearance just yards ahead of her friends, where any struggle or cry would have been instantly heard. 2. The disappearance of Trenny Gibson, 1976. 5 years before Polly Melton disappeared, another baffling vanishing occurred on a different trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. On October 8, 1976, 16-year-old Trenny Gibson went on a school field trip with approximately 40 of her classmates from Bearden High School. The students hiked up to Andrews Bald, a high-altitude grassy clearing that offers panoramic views of the surrounding mountains. The weather was crisp and clear, typical of October in the Smokies. The students hiked in small, informal groups spread out along the well-traveled trail. During the hike back down, Trenny was walking with several classmates. She was energetic and kept a steady, quick pace, occasionally moving between different small groups of friends as they descended. At one point, near a moderately steep drop-off on the side of the trail, Trenny stepped slightly ahead of the classmates she was walking with. She went around a curve in the path, vanishing from their view for only a matter of seconds. When her classmates rounded the curve, Trenny was gone. Assuming she had simply sped up to catch up with the group ahead of her, the students kept walking. However, when the entire field trip assembled at the parking lot to board the school buses, Trenny was nowhere to be found. A massive, multi-agency search was initiated immediately. Because she was a teenager, searchers initially thought she might have run away or taken a wrong turn on one of the intersecting paths. Search and rescue personnel, rangers, and tracking dogs combed the ridges. The dogs tracked her scent to a specific point near the edge of the trail, very close to where her classmates had last seen her, and then completely lost it. Despite weeks of searching the steep, heavily forested slopes below the trail, no trace of Trenny, her clothing, or her belongings was ever discovered. Like Polly Melton, she seemed to have vanished in a tiny pocket of time between groups of hikers. The disappearance of Dennis Martin, 1969. The most famous and tragic of the Great Smoky Mountains unsolved mysteries occurred on Father's Day weekend in June of 1969. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was visiting the park on an annual family camping trip at Spence Field, a high mountain meadow located along the Appalachian Trail. Dennis, his father, his grandfather, and his older brother were camping with another family. On the afternoon of June 14th, the children, including Dennis, decided to play a prank on the adults. They planned to split up, hide in the bushes surrounding the grassy clearing, and then jump out from different sides to surprise the parents. Dennis was wearing a red t-shirt and dark green pants. He went to hide behind a bush on the edge of the clearing, just a few dozen yards from where his father and grandfather were sitting. The other children ran to their respective hiding spots. When the signal was given, the older boys jumped out and surprised the adults, laughing, but Dennis didn't emerge. His father, Bill Martin, immediately walked over to the bush where he had watched Dennis go. There was no sign of the boy. Within minutes of the disappearance, Bill ran down the trail in the direction he thought Dennis might have wandered, calling his name. He ran for miles, searching the steep ravines, but found nothing. What followed remains the largest and most complex search and rescue operation in the history of the National Park Service. Because of the scale of the incident, the search quickly grew to include over 1,400 personnel, including National Guard troops, park rangers, local volunteers, tracking dog teams, and even specialized military units like the Green Berets. The search was plagued by a series of bizarre and tragic setbacks. The weather torrent. Shortly after Dennis went missing, a massive, torrential rainstorm struck the mountains, dumping several inches of water. The storm washed away any footprint or scent trail that tracking dogs might have followed, and the temperature dropped significantly, raising fears of hypothermia. The scent dog's behavior. The highly trained search dogs brought to Spence Field behaved strangely. Instead of picking up a trail and moving forward, they paced in tight circles, whined, and displayed signs of intense fear, refusing to enter the thick brush. The Keyhole sighting. On the afternoon of the disappearance, a tourist family hiking several miles away from Spence Field reported hearing a sickening, high-pitched scream coming from a deep ravine. Looking through the trees, they claimed to have seen a rough-looking, disheveled man carrying something over his shoulder, running through the brush. However, because of the distance and the timing, investigators were never able to definitively link this sighting to Dennis. Despite months of searching and the physical clearing of massive swaths of forest, not a single trace of Dennis Martin, no red fiber from his shirt, no shoe, and no footprint, was ever found.
We don't know why people are going missing on the 17th of each month, but we've noticed a disturbing pattern.